Hello. Welcome to another episode of the RKMCS Criminology Lecture Series. I'm Professor Angelica, and I'm your lecturer for today. We are going to talk about victimology. This is one of the areas covered in the course Criminology, and perhaps one of the most interesting topics in sociological criminology, which is boosted within the new curriculum. My goal is that, after this presentation, you could be able to understand better about crime victims, especially the role of victims in the victimization process. My presentation covers some important terms, words and concepts. Then I proceed with the theories of victimization. After which, I'll share about the pioneers of this field, and then the types of victims. Finally, the role of the criminal justice system in dealing with victims. This will take about a few minutes, but you are encouraged to take down notes. If not, you can just rewind this video in order for you to follow through. So, let's start by defining a few important words used in this study. First, victimology. What is victimology? Victimology has been defined as the scientific study of the extent, nature and causes of criminal victimization, its consequences for the persons involved and the reactions thereto by society, in particular the police and the criminal justice system, as well as voluntary workers and professional helpers. Second, crime victims. Who are crime victims? The term crime victim is used to include a person, groups or people, or entities who have suffered injury or loss due to illegal activity. The harm can be physical, psychological, or economic. By definition, this includes victims of fraud or financial schemes, businesses, or even the government. In tax or fraud cases, the victim is the government, and the loss of revenue is ultimately felt by honest citizens who dutifully fulfill their responsibilities. Third, the word victims. Victims are persons who, individually or collectively, have suffered harm, including physical or mental injury, emotional suffering, economic loss or substantial impairment of their fundamental rights, through acts or omissions that are in violation of criminal laws, including those proscribing abuses of power. Fourth, victimization. Victimization is the process of being victimized or becoming a victim. The field that studies the process, rates, incidence, effects, and prevalence of victimization is called victimology. And fifth, the concept of general victimology. This was first explicitly described by Mendelssohn in 1956 as he advocated a general study of what he now called victimity, with a view to reducing it by prevention and victim assistance. Now, let's individually describe the theories that explain about why people and how they are victimized. In here, there are three key theories so far that I can share. One theory is the victim precipitation theory. This theory analyzes how a victim's interaction with an offender may contribute to the crime being committed. Such concept was introduced by Marvin Wolfgang, in his article entitled, Victim Precipitated Criminal Homicide, in the 1950s. It relates to how and why crime happens. While most theories focus on the acts and intentions of the offender, victim precipitation seeks to understand the interaction between the victim and the offender. Under this theory, the victim is viewed an active participant in the crime. This happens in two ways. First, the victim is the participant in the crime who acts first, and second, the victim encourages or provokes the offender to commit the crime. These factors are the primary components of this theory. In short, the victim precipitation theory relates to the interactions that make a victim susceptible to crime. Another theory is the victim lifestyle theory. The victim lifestyle theory suggests that certain people may become the victims of crimes because of their lifestyles and choices. For example, walking alone at night in a dangerous area, conspicuously wearing expensive jewelry, leaving doors unlocked and associating with known criminals are other lifestyle characteristics that may lead to victimization. Then we have the deviant place theory. Deviant place theory states that an individual is more likely to become the victim of a crime when exposed to dangerous areas. In other words, a robber is more likely to target a person walking alone after dark in a bad neighborhood. Thus, the more frequently a person ventures into bad neighborhoods where violent crime is common, the greater the risk of victimization. Next, the pioneers of victimology. There are four known theorists in the field of victimology, and some authors have considered them fathers of the study of crime victims. First, we have Hans von Hentig. a German criminologist who published an article with the title Remarks on the Interaction Between Perpetrator and Victim in 1941, then, The Criminal and His Victim. A criminological textbook in which he devoted a chapter to the victim in 1948. He treated the victim as one of the participants in a crime. Victims were classified according to the nature of their involvement in the criminal act. It was thought that a study of the victim's role might result in a better prevention of crime. Second, we have Benjamin Mendelsohn, an American lawyer, known as the father of victimology, as he was the one who coined the term victimology in the mid-1940s. Deriving from the Latin term victim and the Greek term logos, meaning science of victims. As a criminal law scholar, he became interested in the relationship between the victim and the criminal as he conducted interviews with victims and witnesses. Like von Hentig, he drew attention to the part played by victims in precipitating crimes of violence, for example through provocation. For Mendelsohn, a defense counsel, victim precipitation was a mitigating circumstance in meting out punishment for the offender. Third, we have Marvin Wolfgang, an American sociologist and criminologist who, in 1964 published The Measurement of Delinquency, which was the first study of the true impact of crime on society, then the subculture of violence, towards an integrated theory in criminology, which focused on high rates of violence among blacks and the influence of a black subculture. His most famous work, Delinquency in a Birth Cohort, was published in 1972, which marked the beginning of large-scale studies of crime and delinquency. He popularized the theory of victim precipitation, as explained in my earlier slide. Fourth, we have Stephen Schaeffer, American criminologist and sociologist. Born in Hungary but immigrated to the U.S. and taught as a professor at some of the leading universities. His works includes The Restitution to Victims of Crime 1960, The Victim and His Criminal 1968, Theories in Criminology 1969, Juvenile Delinquency 1970, The Political Criminal 1974, Social Problems in a Changing Society 1975, An Introduction to Criminology 1976. Next, the classification of victims. According to Hentig, the classes of victims are the young, those who are weak by virtue of age and immaturity, the female, those who often have less physically powerful and easily dominated by males, the old, the incapable of physical defense and the common object of confidence scheme, the mentally defective, those who are unable to think clearly, the immigrant, those who are unsure of the rules of conduct in the surrounding society, the minorities, those who suffer from racial prejudice that lead to victimization or unequal treatment by the agency of justice. The depressed, those submissive by virtue of emotional condition. The acquisitive or greedy. The value or act of wanting more propels such individuals into victimization. The wanton or overly sensual. Those ruled by passion and thoughtlessly seeking pleasure. The lonesome, similar to the acquisitive type of victim, by virtue of wanting companionship or affection. The heartbroken, those emotionally disturbed by virtue of heartaches and pains. And the tormentor, the type of victim who asked for it, often from his own family or friends. According to Mendelsohn, the types of victims are, the completely innocent victim. Such a person is an ideal victim in popular perception. In this category placed persons victimized while they were unconscious, and the child victims. The victims with only minor guilt, and those victimized due to ignorance. Victim who is just as guilty as the offender, and the voluntary victim. Suicide cases are common to this category. The victim guiltier than the offender. This category was described as containing persons who provoked the criminal or actively induced their own victimization. The most guilty victim. An attacker killed by a would-be victim in the act of defending themselves were placed into this category. And last but not the least, the imaginary victim. Those suffering from mental disorders, or those victims due to extreme mental abnormalities. Now, the last part of my presentation. Let us talk about victims and the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is charged with processing cases from the point of victimization, through investigation, arrest, prosecution and sanctions. At each point along this continuum, criminal justice agencies and professionals have opportunities and obligations to provide victims with assistance, services and accommodations ease their difficulties in what is already a very trying, tragic time. The criminal justice system can minimize and avoid inflicting secondary victimization that has often characterized much of the plight of victims of crime. Victims have access to services. This is an extremely important component of any service delivery plan, and depends greatly on the physical location and accessibility of such services. Court-based advocacy programs should be established in all adult and juvenile court facilities. Probation officials must guarantee that the crucial victim impact information is incorporated into their recommendations to the court relevant to an offender's sentencing and community supervision plan. Correctional institutions should include important victim information, such as notification requests and victim impact statements, in offender files or databases, with security precautions established to protect victim confidentiality. Paroling authorities should encourage and accept victim impact statements, and offer victims whatever reasonable protections they request if an offender is released to parole supervision. Training and technical assistance. Victim sensitivity training should be provided to all criminal and juvenile justice professionals, as part of mandatory orientation educational programs, as well as continuing education. In the Philippines, the Bill of Rights protects persons accused of a commission of a crime. Victims are not provided with the same safeguards to minimize damage or injury caused by the commission of crimes. These victims usually suffer physical and psychological trauma. Hence, they should be treated with respect, compassion and dignity throughout the criminal justice process. The Philippine Constitution mandate that the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights. At present, there is no law yet in the Philippines that deals with crime victims, except that of the Victim Compensation Program offered by the Department of Justice or DOJ. The basis for the Victim Compensation Program is Republic Act No. 7309 or the law creating the Board of Claims, under the Department of Justice, granting compensation for victims of unjust imprisonment or detention and victims of violent crimes. That ends my short presentation about victimology. Thank you for watching and listening. Kindly share this with others. Like or follow us on our Facebook page or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos. You can also sign up to our website www.criminologysolutions.com and download files for your educational needs. Mabuhay!